All right, welcome back. Ikemesit Effiong, the head of research, is rejoining us again due to the network challenge. Welcome again, Ikemesit, and I hope that this network would not just, like they say in Nigeria, no show yourself. Don't show yourself this morning. Anyway, let, let's continue. I know you had landed on what you were saying earlier, but let me ask this dimension of question, which is still around inflation. This inflation that we're seeing right now, is it monetarily driven? What are some of the things that are associated with the inflation we are seeing right now? Monetarily driven in the sense that is it a cost, is it CBN that cost it? And that's one. And number two, is it CBN too that can solve this dimension of inflation? I hope you understand what I'm asking.
Okay, so I'll attempt to answer this. What we're clearly seeing in Nigeria is a conflation of factors. First, Nigeria is not just dealing with high inflation. We're also in a high unemployment environment. We're also in a low growth, right,
Mm.
environment. So a combination of those three things actually puts you in what is called a
Stagflation.
stagflation,
Yeah.
right? And it's really every economist and every researcher's worst nightmare, right? Because it's
Mm.
a very difficult trap, right, in order to break out of. And a lot of that is not really the CBN's cause directly. Nigeria's inflation has proven a very stubborn bit to control, largely because there are big structural issues that continue to drive like high prices in this market. Logistics and supply chain management is notoriously difficult in this country because of the poor state of our infrastructure and also the over reliance on one aspect of our infrastructure mix, which is our roads, right? That adds to the cost of prices. Increasingly, over the past decade and a half, security has also become a very key component. And as a matter of fact, it largely accounts for why food inflation, which is the primary thing that we use the Jollof Index to track, right, is stubbornly high and is a couple of percentage points above core inflation because a lot of the insecurity that we see in this country disproportionately affects food growing regions, lots of farmlands, and lots of farmers, right, as well as other associated agricultural enterprises have been affected disproportionately by the country's still worsening security situation. And then you also have the parameters of a robustly growing population. Nigeria's population growth rate is, a little under 3%, right, per year. We're adding something on the order of 120,000 Nigerians, right, per year to this country's population. The overwhelming majority of Nigerians are young. Many of them haven't entered the labor force yet. And so while the future labor pool is pretty extensive, the amount of dependents, right, especially young dependents that we have in Nigeria, continues to grow at a very healthy pace. So that's putting pressure on wages, that's putting pressure on jobs availability, and then when you combine that with an intractable security situation and also the infrastructure dynamics that we have at play, and the fact that we import a substantial amount
Mm.
of the food and the raw material inputs that go into manufacturing and what and other forms of processing enterprises that we have in this country, you really have the perfect storm, right?
Mm.
That's led to high unemployment, high inflation, and also this low growth environment that we've seen. And that's why those structural issues are things that the NPR and the NPC's work is not necessarily designed to address in its full dimensions. And that's why the CBN can do all that it can, and rate increases are important. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, but substantial policy reform has to support that, and
Mm.
also a final resolution to the security situation so that a lot of our food, right, begins to begins to be grown, harvested, and also isn't lost along the way, and it gets to the end user, then you'd begin to see a floor and some form of price stability begin to push through to the market.
Ikemesit, you just, it was as if you were listening to what I was really thinking, what was going on in my head when you brought up that FX component side. And that was why I asked you the question earlier, because it seems the Nigerian economy now, the way it is, you know, it's like all the parts are disjointed. All the parts have issues right now. Do you agree with me? Because it's like you can't even take this. While you're trying to solve this, the other things are roaring its head, that it seems you've got to solve everything together before you get your goal, before you get to your targeted goal. Is it? And inflation is one of it. Because insecurity has really pervaded the whole country right now, that farmers can't even go to the farms and all of that. And we're seeing the results, higher food prices, also permeating into FX, the foreign exchange. Now, let me talk to you about that FX component, which you raised a bit. I want to dig further into it. How much of FX, that is the foreign exchange, it's really affecting higher food prices right now, especially concerning the food basket? Majority of what we eat, is it still imported, despite the Central Bank of Nigeria doing a lot of intervention into agriculture, rice, and perhaps 21 other commodities? How much of this FX component is still affecting us?
It is a significant component, and this is something that at SBM we have, we've also sort of interrogated, and we've looked at the data. And what you find out is that Nigeria is only really self-sufficient, and so that means it produces enough to satisfy domestic consumption in 2 or 3 key crops. For all of the other ones, there are substantial gaps that we need to make up via importation, despite all of the government-led interventions that you have enumerated. Rice has become a very important part of our food basket and our food mix, because as Nigeria continues to rapidly urbanize, now Nigeria is almost at parity. So Nigeria is almost 50% rural and 50% urban, right?
Really?
And what we've noticed is that rice consumption has tracked urban population growth. Right, in Nigeria, just because it's easier to make, it's more cost effective. The caloric intake of rice relative to how much you need to spend in cooking it, in transporting it, in growing it, right, is a lot higher than you would see with things like cassava, for example, right, or other forms of grains. It certainly is higher than yam. Right, and so it is the case that as Nigeria has continued to urbanize, we have had to consume more rice. Nigeria stopped being self-sufficient in rice consumption in the late 80s, right? And so what has happened is that we've always had to import substantial amounts of rice, and that, of course, exposes us disproportionately to those foreign exchange currency risks, which is now wreaking havoc in the market. But it has certainly been the case that risk has always led to instability or some form of a price mechanism accounting, right, for the better part of 5 years now. The CBN has done its best to address that, but would argue that also policy has simultaneously tried to address the problem, but also exacerbated the problem, because on the one hand, we're trying to we're trying to develop self-sufficiency. We also created the preconditions for scarcity and, in the end, price sensitivity and price increases in the market with the border closure policy. And so a policy stance where we both prioritized and we looked at other forms of incentivizing domestic producers, while also ensuring that prices don't go far ahead of the market, that the product becomes unaffordable for a lot of Nigerians. We actually didn't pursue that strategy. Our strategy was just to close the borders and then give domestic producers the mandate to actually pick up the slack, and they haven't been able to do it. And what you saw was that, our neighbors, chiefly Benin and Cameroon, simultaneously became very large importers of rice, which is very telling because their populations did not dramatically grow.
Increase.
And that just alluded to the fact that a lot of smuggling, right, into Nigeria was taking place via our overland borders. And so there is certainly the place for policy to address these issues, but also the general fact that we have a managed currency regime, right, is that has meant that for domestic players and operators in the market, it's been very difficult for them to make any sort of, long-term or even medium-term economic planning, just because the currency rates are all over the place, especially at the black market, and it's not available to everyone, as you very well know, as your viewers will know, if anyone has tried to access foreign currency, either at the official or at the parallel markets. And so the markets really are interconnected. And I think that that is what Nigerian consumers are now beginning to understand, and policymakers are sort of playing catch up on. And so, any movement in the foreign currency market is likely to have, adverse
Okay.
effects or even or positive effects if they're positive moves, right, on things like food security, food availability, and otherwise. And that's something that I think that policymakers need to pay closer attention.
Okay, Ikemesit, so much to chew, especially from what we'll be discussing in a while. The Jollof Index telling the story of changing food prices, like I said at the beginning of the program. But you did talk about importation, that we're still seeing importation of foreign rice into the country. Which countries are we seeing that imported rice coming into the country? Because we know that we also have Nigerian locally made rice, which is also in the market, but seemingly not affordable also. But where are we seeing this foreign rice coming in from?
I mean, largely they're coming in from Southeast Asia, which is which has traditionally been the source of a lot of foreign grown rice, right, in the market. And this again alludes to those structural deficiencies that I had mentioned at the onset of our conversation, which is that it is still, after accounting for all of the interventions by policymakers and the hard work that's been plowed into domestic production by operators here in Nigeria, it is still cost effective to import, and that simply is the fact. We did research in 2019 that showed that Apapa and Tinkan Islands, which are primary import and export gateways, are two of the most expensive ports through which to actually get goods into on the entire African continent. We compared them with their peers, one of them in this region, Tema in Ghana, and also with Durban in South Africa. And what we found was that it costs more to to import goods, right, from both from Europe and from Asia through Apapa and Tinkan than through both Tema and Durban, right? And even accounting for those structural deficiencies, again, the fact is that the domestic operating environment is still anathema towards economic growth and economic production, right, for our Nigerian operators, right? The fact that even with all of those hoops, even with the added cost of smuggling, because take note, it's not easy and it's not cheap to actually smuggle goods, to get them through, unregulated, often untarred routes that are devoid of any sort of, concrete or formal infrastructural support. Even accounting for all of those, or accounting for all of the challenges that come with legal importation, oftentimes you still find that, you know, imported goods are very competitive in the domestic market compared to
Okay.
domestically produced goods. And that tells its own story. And really, in the end, I suppose the object lesson would be that if more focus is plowed, if a lot of the focus that is plowed towards managing foreign exchange demand, which will always be there, it can't be eliminated, or managing the kinds of things that we import, we will always need to import things. There is no country that is 100% self-sufficient in all of the goods and services that it requires. If a lot of that focus is channeled towards improving the domestic operating environment,
Okay.
fixing infrastructure, setting policies such that the rules on things like taxation, and there's a double taxation problem, for example, in Nigeria between, who should collect what charges and what levies between the federal government and the states. For many goods and many items, that's still up in the air. There's still a conversation around VAT and who should collect VAT that's still making its way through the courts, for example,
Okay,
and fixing
Ikemesit.
security, improving our storage capacity. Nigeria has very limited storage capacity, not just with respect to food, but with respect to a vast swath of other goods and products and produces and services, right? If a lot of the policy framework and the policy focus is channeled towards addressing those things, it could begin to cream off some of those percentage points off of inflation. And then if you're able to get inflation down to single digits, it becomes a lot more manageable. And then things like the MPC, the NPR, the cash reserve ratio, whether to move it or not, and what to do about bond yields,
Okay.
become effective monetary tools. Those tools only really, come to their own and stand their ground when a lot of the structural issues have been addressed.
Okay, Ikemesit, I'm looking at our time, and I would appreciate if we can just run through quickly because we still have a lot to talk about. So I will run through a lot, and I'm hoping that you would also run through it briskly with me. I'm taking a look at this
I'll try.
report now and see how much does it take to make a pot of jollof rice. I know there are regional costs, but from your report, you did tell, in your report, you said you surveyed 13 markets and all of that. How much does it take averagely to make a pot of jollof rice for 5 people? That's one. So secondly, the coping strategies of Nigerians. You're saying that Nigerians are in the danger of starving right now if measures are not taken to buffer the effects of higher food prices. The other thing that was also interesting to me here is that in markets, especially in Lagos markets, you did say that traders are saying now that they do rotation in terms of trading. There's a rotation and only a number of people are allowed to buy and sell. For instance, tomatoes for certain weeks. So that can also affect price, because if you have like 5 people selling tomatoes, they may even have a plan, don't sell it more than this price and all of that. So I want you to address these 3 issues very quickly.
Okay, so right now, according to our latest numbers for the second quarter of the year, it costs 9,311 naira to make a pot of jollof rice for a family of 5. Now, the Jollof Index is calculated on a weighted basis, which means we put together the full prices of all of the components that go into jollof rice: the tomatoes, your seasoning, your protein sauce. Our protein source of choice is chicken, and we calculate for for a family of 5, which is the NBS's average size for the Nigerian family, right? As of now, the average is actually 5.1, and so that's how we calculate the numbers. And that number is up from 8,500 plus in the first quarter of the year. So it generally tracks with rising inflation as tracked by the National Bureau of Statistics. So that's the first one. The second one, your second and your third questions, which have to do with coping mechanisms, yes, those have been present in the market for quite some time now. And the interesting thing about the dynamics in the Lagos market is that it is less a price coping strategy, right, of alternating days and limiting the amount of sellers that are available in the market. And it's more, a produce or a product availability coping mechanism. And that really is largely a tale of regulation at sort of the local level. There are increased charges and levies and taxes that a lot of local governments, as well as market associations, as many Nigerians know, a lot of these markets, are unionized or have some form of combines. A lot of those charges and a lot of those levies have been increased. A lot of our survey respondents told us, but also it's also a tale of the dwindling security picture in a lot of the food growing regions where these market sellers source, things like tomatoes and vegetables from, which is that because they are not guaranteed a steady access to, their suppliers, right, in the hinterlands and in the food growing regions, they have to, in a manner of speaking, ration, right, and that has, added an extra layer on the prices of key inputs. We're also seeing feedback around the quality, right, of some of this produce, right, and so for any one of your viewers who has been to the market recently, you might have noticed that things like the sizes of tomatoes have shrunk, and that largely was noticed in parts of the Southwest, but also in some of the markets that we surveyed in the North Central region, including Abuja, right, where you are currently at. And that was largely because in some food growing areas, certain farmers had to harvest early, right? And so as soon as their produce started budding and the first signs of harvest came up, in order not to lose whatever value they could get from what they already had, because no one could price in when the next, unfortunately, when the next security, incident might occur, or how prices might look in the market. There are lots of producers who simply just harvested what they could and sent them to the markets too. And so, the story around the Jollof Index, the interplay of supply and demand, as well as, the security and the policy and the regulatory picture is just multi-layered on all of those levels.
Okay.
But what it really means for the Nigerian consumer is that all of it added up, right? Eventually when you do go to the market and you're paying to make that, still delicious, but increasingly more expensive pot of jollof rice.
I saw here that, of course, prices have remained high. Here, I'm in Abuja. Prices have remained high in Wuse too. It's like whenever you go to the market, there's an uptick. What the price you bought last time will not be the price. For example, a loaf of bread now goes for 1,000 naira. The last time I bought, 1,000 naira right now. But which geopolitical zone has the highest food price, highest food prices? That's one. And number two, is there an impending food crisis that is really staring us in the face? That's number two question. Number three, Ikemesit, is with these upcoming elections, do you think that this inflation or higher food prices, which we're seeing at least over the past few months, will be a motivation for electorates to vote otherwise? Do you understand my question? If these food prices, the higher food prices, will be a motivation for Nigerians not to vote APC, to vote otherwise in 2023, because even in developed economies like the United States, is the economy stupid? Americans vote along the lines of job numbers, vote along the lines of inflation, vote along the lines of, economic indices. So do you see a shift at this upcoming elections if that would happen? Very quickly. 3 questions, and you have 2 minutes to answer.
Okay. So to your first question, the northwest geopolitical zone is now the most expensive region in the country in which to make a pot of jollof rice, according to our index. Traditionally, it had been the north central, and the north central is really not too far behind. And the Abuja markets, especially Wuse too, but also to a lesser extent Yanya, have traditionally over the past year been some of the most expensive markets to source your jollof rice inputs. But now the Kano markets, as well as Asoto markets, right, have overtaken Abuja, and that largely is a tale of the worsening security picture there. I'm trying to remember your second question. I do remember the third one about it. Okay, I do remember your second question.
Food crisis.
Yes, I mean, organizations like the Food and Agricultural Organization and the United Nations are already projecting that something on the order of 4 to 10 million Nigerians, depending on which source you consult, might cross over into food insecure territory, which simply means that they would be making significant decisions about where to source food and many other things, questions around education, for example, questions around rent, for example, would be things that would essentially become opportunity cost, right? As a result of that, right, Nigeria is home to one of the largest internally displaced persons populations in the world already on account of the security situation in the country, and what the security situation has now done to the overall food picture is that food prices become so astronomically expensive that
Okay.
Nigerians begin to cut down on the number of protein sources, right? For example, which is a key indicator of the nourishment and the health, right, of the population. That lots of population
Ikemesit.
researchers, right, calculate
Ikemesit,
and watch
if you can
and
hear me.
observe, right? And also the quantity and also the amount of times and the amount of meals that Nigerians have in a day. So those are things to watch. To your final question, it is likely that if inflation continues to worsen, if you continue to see instability in the forex market, it does become a security, it does become an election issue. Everyone eats food. No one is immune from food prices, irrespective of whatever socioeconomic demographic you occupy. And food prices or increased prices in general are things that are not only sensitive, but they are immediate. You can
Okay.
easily feel them. You can see them. You can draw a benchmark from how.
Okay. Ikemesit, I'm afraid we've got to go now, but at least we've gotten your answers to the 3 questions. Thank you very much if you can hear me. I really also wanted to go into inflation, taking a look at inflation since independence, but we can do that on a later date. Thank you very much. I've been speaking with Ikemesit Effiong, who is the head of research at SBM Intelligence. That's the much we can take today. Please join me again tomorrow for the final edition of the week. I am Nancy Naji. Be the best you can be and be that change that you want to see. Bye now.